in learning languages. I think it makes for a much more interesting life, certainly has in my case. So I hope you'll find it interesting, and I'm really looking forward to answering your questions.
Yes, we've had so many that have already been submitted to us, but please keep them coming, as we're going to try and get through tons today. And to start off, just so that our young people can kind of get to know you a little bit better and where you come from and why languages are important to you, could you tell us about your career journey and what it is you do now?
Well, I am a journalist, and I've been a journalist pretty much all of my adult life. I have worked as a television journalist for the BBC and Channel 4. I've worked as a radio journalist for the BBC, and I've worked as a newspaper journalist for the Sunday Times, the Times, Financial Times. So I've worked in lots of different mediums, but always journalism and storytelling. And for a while, I was what we call a foreign correspondent, which is I was based in another country, reporting from there, largely France. And that was a job I would never have got if I didn't speak French. And I got to live in Paris for several years. I've also lived in Moscow for a bit, although I have to say I tried to learn Russian, it's pretty ropey, and also in Hungary. So I did get to travel with my job. My career journey was this. I always quite liked, and I'm going to do this in relevance to languages, I did always quite like learning languages. And so I did, at school, I did Spanish, German and French, certainly up to 16, up to sort of GCSE time. Then I carried on with French to the end of school, but I didn't do it at university. I think part of the reason is that I learn languages much better by listening and speaking. I'm slightly dyslexic, so I struggle a bit with writing and grammar, which might sound weird since I'm a journalist, but you know, there's always ways of getting around these things, spell check, etc. So I thought that doing a language at university, I didn't think that would be for me, because I thought, well, you can always learn a language on the side. You know, it's not something you have to spend 3 years studying. So I did politics and economics at a London university, and from then I did a 1-year journalism course after that, postgraduate, and then I joined the BBC as a trainee, and I was a news reporter, a radio news reporter to start with, and then radio and TV. And after doing that for a few years, I really wanted to go abroad. I really wanted to travel. And I saw that there was a job based in Central Europe, in Budapest, in Hungary. So I applied for that, and I don't think there were very many applicants, so I got it. And I tried to learn Hungarian, which is one of the most difficult languages ever. And I have to say, I didn't really succeed. I wasn't there long enough to become fluent, and it's very difficult. But I learned to get by. And also, when I was there, I used my my basic German, because in that part of the world, you know, it's not that far from Germany. Lots of people speak German. So I was able to, I mean, if I hadn't learned some basic Hungarian before I went and spoken a bit of German, I really would have been lost. So that gave me a great advantage. And it was just, you know, it was very exciting, and I would have been lost with some basic language skills. And I think I'll just say one final thing on that as well, which is that the more languages you learn, the easier it gets and the less scary it gets. So I think that, remember, this is a skill we all have. We all learn a language. We've all learned a language, right? We all speak English, and I'm sure many of you listening probably speak another language at home. So even better, you know, you're already bilingual. So building on languages is kind of once you've got the first one, which we all have. The other thing is, you all have a superpower through your age, right? Because under the age of 25, Your brains are all like sponges when it comes to learning languages. You just absorb them. It becomes it's much more difficult for me now to learn a language because my memory is not as good. My brain doesn't absorb it. So do it now. Do it at school. You absolutely won't regret it. And, you know, I'm actually speaking to you from Vienna in Austria, where I am at the moment. And this is a German-speaking country. And the German that I learned at school has really stood me in good stead because I had the basics. So when I, you know, quite often before I go to a country, if I have a little bit of a language, I'll do some Duolingo or number of really good apps and just, I mean, I'm not saying I'm fluent in German, far from it, but I can have a basic conversation. I can get about, and people really appreciate it in other countries if you try and speak their language, because I think they get a bit fed up with kind of like English speaking people always assuming that everybody's going to go and understand that, because in a way actually being a native English speaker is a disadvantage because so many people learn it, so you have to make that extra effort, but it really is worth it.
So our next question is one that we've had submitted and we thought we'd just ask it, and you've touched on it already, so I'm going to combine it with a second one, which is, why should everyone learn that second language, and when is it too late to start learning?
Well, there are so many reasons to learn a second language. First of all, I think, you know, one of the points I've already made, it makes for an more interesting life. It's much more fun when you travel, and you feel much more confident if you speak a bit of a language when you're traveling. You know, even if, say, you're going to Spain on holiday, even if you just learn some basic kind of, you know, hello, my name is, I'm from, you know, how to order a pizza, or, you know, a Coke or whatever, you know, you'll already feel better. You'll already be enjoying it better. And then there's some more serious reasons. It's actually, do you know what, learning languages, and they've done studies on this, actually makes you more intelligent. I'm serious. Students who study foreign languages tend to do better on standardized tests in maths, reading, vocabulary. It improves your memory. There's also evidence to show that if you speak more than one language, you're better at multitasking, which means doing more than one thing at once. Very important, it makes you more empathetic, and for those of you who don't know this word, it means it makes you understand people better, because once you speak a bit of a language, you know, very often there are words in other languages that don't exist in English, but they do exist in other languages. Like German is full of really great words that don't exist in English. Like there's one which actually is kind of, we use in England a bit, which is Schadenfreude. Now that means to take joy in somebody else's misfortune. It's not a very nice word, but it's like if somebody else is having a hard time and you don't like that person, you go, oh, I've had a bit of Schadenfreude about that. And so that's quite, you know, that's quite good. And it also, it sort of gives you a bit of an insight into how other cultures work, learning their language. So that's very important, makes you more perceptive. For instance, I mean, say I don't know, you might be interested in music or acting. It's all about ear language. So you'll find that good actors and good musicians also tend to be good linguists, and they feed into each other. So learning a language will improve your acting skills or your musical skills and so on. There is also a lot of evidence to show that employers and this is really important, like people who speak more than one language. We live in a very globalized, international, multicultural world, and it doesn't matter what job you end up doing, but you are probably going to be working and communicating with people from other cultures, and speaking another language really helps with that. So when you go and apply for a job and it's on your CV, and it doesn't matter whether you've studied at a university or whatever, you can just, you know, as long as you've done it at school, or maybe you've even taught yourself. You know, lots of people teach themselves languages now. There's so many great resources online for that. But having that experience will definitely make you much more attractive to employers. And I'll tell you a story about my stepson. My stepson did German A-level. Didn't do terribly well in it, but that's all right. But he quite liked the experience of learning a language. So he decided to do Chinese at university, Mandarin. He did Mandarin at Sheffield. And in his, when you learn a language at university, you always do a year abroad. And he did a year abroad in Shanghai, in China, which is a fantastic city. Really, really exciting and very modern, and lots of cool things to do. And he made friends there. I mean, there were other students from Sheffield there, but he also made some Chinese friends. And so when he finished university and he got his degree, he went back out to China and to Shanghai. And he really likes computer games a lot. Spent a lot of time playing games in his bedroom. That will be familiar to many of you. And he got a job working for a Chinese company, a computer games company that wanted to translate their games into English. So he started doing that, and he so liked working in computer games that after about 2 or 3 years in China, he came home and he did a postgraduate degree at Goldsmiths in London as a computer games designer. And he is now, and has worked for some years, as a computer games designer. He's a level designer, for those of you who know what that means. And he absolutely loves it, because he is being paid, if you like, to do what he loves most. And that would not have come about had he not spoken Chinese or gone to China. It took him on a journey. It also means that he has access to Chinese computer games. He's able to play those and so on, which actually kind of helps him in his profession, because that's a really big market. So I'll tell you another story, which is that my husband, when he left university, he got a sort of special scholarship from an organisation called the British Council to go to the Czech Republic. Which was then actually called Czechoslovakia, but I won't go down the history of that. And he learned Czech. Now, at the time, he actually wanted to be an actor, and there was quite a lot of theatre there, which is why he kind of went there. But as a result of learning Czech and living in that part of the world in Eastern Europe, he started to, and there weren't that many British people there at the time, he started to write articles for newspapers in the UK. And as a result, he became a journalist and a writer, and he does that to this day. The other thing is that because he speaks Czech, which is part of the Slav language group, he was able to learn other Slav languages quite easily. So he can read and understand Polish, for instance. He can't sort of speak it, but he can understand it. He can read Russian. He speaks Serbo-Croat, which is what they speak in Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia and the Western Balkans. So that led to all sorts of interesting opportunities. And as I say, the same for me. If I hadn't learned French, I wouldn't then have lived in France for many years and had French friends. And I still to this day enjoy reading French novels and watching French movies. And so I have a whole other world that I can dip into.
Really interesting, and I love those different stories, particularly the one about your stepson in the gaming industry. My brother's in the gaming industry and got in through a similar sort of way, but it's really about learning another skill that allows you to know people to get in, because it's one of those industries where you need to know someone really to be able to get paid work. So yeah, really interesting that language was the door that opened that.
Yeah, and
who would have thought
he actually spoke English in China and Chinese that got into that, because otherwise it's, as you say, just getting that, because you'll all find that first foot in the door is really difficult. I mean, there was just one more thing I wanted to say, is that your brain is a muscle, right? And language is a super good workout. So it doesn't matter whether you want to be a doctor or, you know, or a lawyer or whatever, you could still learn languages and it'd still be really useful. In fact, actually, I've got another little story about that. My brother also learned French, and he ended up, he is a lawyer, but he ended up getting a job at one point in France as a result of speaking French. So, you know, there is that. So it's, I know doctors who have gone and worked abroad. Even if you're not fluent, that's not the point. It's like once you start learning languages, you build on it, it becomes easier to communicate. Less scary. The more you learn, the scary it is.
So thinking about all these languages, was there a time that, you know, you struggled with something, if that's tackling a particular language or just generally, and how did you kind of overcome that and learn to get past it?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I've struggled. I mean, as I say, I've definitely kind of struggled at school learning languages with some of the grammar and so on. And I mean, you know, when I was learning languages at school, we didn't have all these kind of like amazing apps. You know, it's great stuff on YouTube. We'll talk about that later. But so it was a lot of sort of sitting in the classroom reading textbooks, and my brain just finds it very difficult, my dyslexic brain, to kind of absorb grammar rules and so on and so on. And the way I got through that with French was I think basically is to not worry about making mistakes. It just doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, you know, my grammar in French got better the more I spoke it, because I just learnt it by listening to other people. The key thing is to be able to communicate with somebody else from a different culture and not be embarrassed and not care. So I think that's how I got over my difficulty of the whole not really being able to kind of, you know, struggling a bit with grammar, was to say, of course you have to learn the grammar, of course you have to do those basics, but not to fall at that first stop, say, oh no, I can't do it. It was like, okay, I'm just going to try speaking it. I'm just going to, you know, just going to have a go, and try not to worry about being, you know, sounding stupid, because on the whole, people are really grateful when you have a go. I mean, if you think about it, when somebody comes up to you and speaks in broken English, you don't kind of go, oh God, their English is terrible. You know, you kind of like, you help them, don't you? Because, you know, we're humans and we want to help each other, and you know, like, yeah. So I think that's how I got over you know, that particular sort of fear of sounding stupid, fear of not being very good at grammar, you know, and really the best way of that, it was to, so when in between school and university, I went and lived in Paris with a family at sort of an au pair thing, and I was surrounded by French all the time, and that was really when my French took off. And also, I should say, I got a boyfriend who spoke French, and that was a very, very good way of learning a language, as you've got a big incentive.
Yeah, certainly. Although I have to say my husband's Dutch and I don't speak very good Dutch at all, because that's a very hard language.
That is a hard language. Also, they all speak really, really good English.
Yes, they all do. It makes it more difficult to practice, for sure. Our final question then of our formal interview before we move on to our student questions, and we've got loads coming in, keep them coming, they're coming in fast and furious, is advice for how to start learning a language. So where do you start and how do you go, that's my starting point? Just 1 second, folks. Small internet issue, but it's just picking up now. Oh, you're on mute, Kirsty.
I am very sorry about that. I am back. Sorry about that. Don't know what happened.
It's all right. These things happen. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Yes. So the final question then before we move on to a student is, what advice do you have for starting? Because it can be a little bit daunting, particularly if you're not studying a GCSE or an A level and you're just doing it off your own back in your own time. how do you start learning a language?
Okay, well, look, there are lots of great there's lots of great free stuff out on the internet to use. I would suggest there's one on YouTube called Easy Languages, right? I've been using it to improve my German, and it's basically people making little films like native speakers. So like the German one is somebody, you know, a bunch of young people wandering around Berlin asking other people questions, and there's subtitles on it. So if you do the very first one, which is, you know, how to say hello in whatever language you're learning, there'll be one like that, and you just start and you repeat it. And the good thing is you can or anything on YouTube you can transcribe. You know, if you go to that place on YouTube where there's the 3 little dots and you click on it, you can transcribe. So you could find something you find really interesting, maybe in a foreign language, transcribe it, then put it through Google Translate. So you've got it in, let's say, Spanish and in English, and read it through and listen to it. And that's often a really good way. There's parallel texts. So another kind of, like, say you're really into music, you could like choose a favorite song, right? Put it through Google Translate and put the 2 texts next to each other and compare words. So the other thing is, very often, particularly with European languages, there'll be words that you'll go, oh yeah, I recognize that. So, you know, the word for intelligent, for instance, is the same really with different pronunciations. So we say intelligent, the French say intelligent, the Germans say intelligent, the Spanish say inteligente, whatever, you know. So excuse me if I massacred that one, but you know, you can find little words, go, okay, I know that, and start building comprehension around that. So songs, there are parallel storybooks as well, where you're on one page, you have it in one language, the other in another language. That's a really good way. Podcasts, there's one called The Coffee Break, which is quite good. And then apps. I mean, I find Duolingo really good. I think that's excellent because it's interactive and you build your way up. Quizlet. I think that's a free one. That's really great for flashcards, and you can make your own vocab list. Memorize is another one. So yeah, Duolingo, Quizlet, Memorize, and Easy Languages on YouTube. I would say watching films in another language, that was really, or TV programs with subtitles. I found that really, really useful. So I'm trying to improve my German at the moment, so I'm watching quite a lot of German language TV, but I'll put on the English subtitles. So I'm hearing, my brain is absorbing it. And then you've got to be kind of disciplined, really. You've got to set yourself a task, like I'm going to learn 5 or 10 new words a day. And then quite often I'll put them on Post-it notes around the place, you know. And then, you know, sort of test myself. So you need a little bit of discipline like that. But frankly, you know, learning 5 or 10 new words a day is pretty easy, and you can do it on the bus or as you're walking along or as you're lying in bed at night or whatever, and just practice that way.
I love it. I love those different tips. And I love Duolingo as well, and a top tip for that one is actually has more features if you do it online rather than on the app. It's obviously easier for them to develop the app, so there's more things available to help you learn. So kind of use your account on the app as you're out, and also hop in when you're at home on a computer. Double learning, twice the amount of stuff.
I agree. I use it online, yeah, as more than the app, I would say, yeah.
We have tons of questions. Tons of questions, and we've had several come in. So one question that we have here is, have you ever wanted to learn Polish? And if you have, can you say hello? And as an extension to that, because I love this question, could you say hello in all of the languages that you are confident in that you speak?
Oh God, you put me on the spot now. I don't speak Polish, sadly. I said my husband can understand a bit of it. I'm really embarrassed to say that I have never been to Poland. I would very much love to go, and when I go, because I'm actually discussing going on a trip there. Before I go, I will definitely be doing some Duolingo to God, all the now I'm going to feel say hello. So let me start by saying, well, I'll say good morning to you in Hungarian, which is Jó napot kívánok. And so I hope there's probably some Hungarians out there going, God, you know. I mean, hello is a difficult one, actually, because there's all sorts of different expressions. Like in German, you could say Guten Tag, which would mean good day, but here in Austria they say Grüßi, which actually is a shortening of kind of, you know, bless God or something like Grüß Gott, but people have shortened it to Grüßi, or they'll say Servus, or there's all sorts of different types of greeting, you know. So in French, you know, of course you'd say bonjour, but I don't think you really use that very much. You might just, when you see somebody, you know, you might just say, you know, allô, sort of, or ça va, as a kind of greeting. Well, yes, I think I've probably exhausted that for the moment. I won't embarrass myself anymore.
No, really interesting. And I guess we forget that, don't we? That, you know, in England, there's a dozen ways you can say hello and a dozen ways you can say goodbye.
Yeah.
And when you're learning a language, it's like, oh, well, there's just one. But there's not. There's obviously dozens in each language, and colloquial as well. Different regions are going to have different ways of saying things. So
we learn a lot about a culture by how they greet people, because all different cultures have different sorts of greeting. I mean, I just mentioned the Austrian one. Now that, you know, that obviously comes from, it's a Catholic country. It came, you know, from sort of a religious greeting, which is now morphed into something else. So it gives you a window into another culture, how they greet each other, and how, yeah, as I say, language is a window into other worlds.
Our next question then, I've got so many here. We'll go for Testbourne Community School have asked, what's your top tip for someone in Key Stage 3 who's lacking the motivation to continue learning modern foreign languages?
So I think it's one good way is to like try and find what you're passionate about. So let's say you're really interested in film or computer games or whatever, you know, try to do that in another language is a good idea. Just you know, so I'm struggling a bit with this, but I mean, it may be that you're struggling because you think, a bit like I did when I was at school, that you're finding the grammar a bit difficult and it's a bit dry. So try and find ways of making it a bit more exciting for yourself. So, you know, find something, I don't know, like say you were a football fan and, you know, during the World Cup, you always hear all the different national anthems. But I remember during the World Cup once, I just thought, like, because just out of interest, like I got up the lyrics of different national anthems and then I translated them, and that's quite funny actually, because that really does, you know, so I mean, lots of people probably think the English are quite funny, singing about king and queen and blah blah blah, but different, you know. And then the French have a really bloodthirsty national anthem when you put it through Google Translate. So finding ways, you know, I don't know whether it's, I mean, I don't know, maybe you've got a favorite footballer who's from a particular country, and you could like listen to that, to them speaking in Italian, say they're Italian, and then translate on Google what they're saying. So find ways in, not just like the language, but your personal interests, and have a go at something like, you know, go onto YouTube and do easy languages, just do greetings and that, just see in whatever, say, I don't know what you're doing at school, but say you were doing Spanish or whatever and struggling a bit, have a go, just have a go at speaking. So find other ways outside of the classroom, I would say, because you don't have, I mean, sorry to the teachers here, but you know, languages is something that you can teach yourself, really is, if you've got the right motivation. It's not about exams and all that. Just, you know, I mean, I didn't ever do particularly well in exams in my languages, unfortunately, but I still learned because I had a good ear, and that's what matters.
Yeah, taking the initiative to not only just don't accept that's it, the walls of your classroom and what you learn there, is it go further than that and learn other things that they don't have the time to teach you, and that is where that interest might come in. Yeah, really interesting. Cool. I want to crack on again. We've had a question in from Zach from St George's, and they have asked, which language did you find the hardest to learn?
Well, definitely Hungarian, because I actually have learned a bit of Japanese, and you'd think that would be harder, but actually I found Japanese much easier than Hungarian, because Hungarian, the grammatic structure is particularly difficult. Whereas to learn basic Japanese is, I actually found that easier. Also, I think it's kind of the opportunity to speak Hungarian is pretty limited. You know, once I left Hungary, I didn't really meet very many Hungarians, and it's important to keep it up. So it was much easier to keep up French and German and Spanish than Hungarian. Russian I really liked, but I wasn't really there long enough to crack it. But I love the sound of it. I think that's the other thing. Very often there's a kind of music to a certain language that people like or don't like, you know. So I love the sound of French. That helps. I really want to learn Italian next because I like the sound of it. And the other thing is that why Hungarian was difficult is it's not actually a European language. It's what we call a Finno-Ugric language. I think it probably originated, you know, out on the steppes of what is now Russia. So if you learn a European language, so for instance, the fact that I speak French means that I can kind of make out, I can get by in Spanish or Portuguese, or, you know, and I can read a bit of Italian. I understand lots of words because they're similar. They're all Romance Latin languages. So it was easy to build on that. You know, German has loads of you know, what we would recognize as sort of Anglo-Saxon English words in it. So there were building blocks. There are no building blocks in Hungarian. You know, that, like, I don't know, so say the word restaurant, which exists in kind of loads of different European languages in a similar word. You know, in Hungarian it's étterem. You know, it doesn't sound anything. There's nothing to do with restaurant. So.
Yeah, thank you for answering that one for Zach. You actually answered his second question because he submitted another one as well, which was, what other language would you like to learn? So Italian. So you answered that in the same way.
And Italian, I'll tell you, because not only do I like the sound of it, but I like going on holiday in Italy. I like the food. So that's, I've got an incentive to improve my Italian for that reason. Also, Italians don't really tend to speak very good English. They're one of the, you know, we were just saying the Dutch all speak great English, but actually in Italy, very often people won't speak English, and so actually being able to speak a bit of Italian. I mean, I've learned a little bit, but we're going on holiday there soon, and I've already been doing my Duolingo because I'm going in a couple of weeks, and I will be hopefully improving it while I'm there.
Well, our next question we've had a couple of times from a couple of different schools, and a slight variation on the same sort of question. So the Dorking Academy in Swindon and EPCHS have also asked the same sort of question, which is, what do you think is the most important language for young people to learn, or what's the easiest to learn at the start?
It's difficult to say what's the most important, because it kind of depends on, you know, what you're going to do in life. So I'm really reluctant to say what's the most important. I mean, I know there's been a big trend to learn Mandarin, and I think that's great because China's obviously, you know, one of the biggest countries, biggest economies in the world, and so in terms of sort of opportunities and so on, you know, Chinese is undoubtedly useful, but you know, so many other languages. I mean, like I would say, I mean, personally, I think Spanish is a good one. So for my son, who was really not very good, unfortunately, a bit like me, but dyslexic and so on, he really struggled with languages at school, and so I recommended to him that he do Spanish, because I think Spanish is relatively easy. Actually, Spanish is more difficult than the Spanish that they speak in Latin America, but lots of, you know, so that you have this whole continent, Latin America, where but most of the countries, obviously Brazil, they speak Portuguese, but most of all the other countries in they speak Spanish. In large parts of America now, they speak Spanish. If you go to, you know, Florida or Texas or whatever, most people, you'll see both languages and hear both languages. So to get basic Spanish, I think is relatively easy and quite a good one to start with. And then, you know, once you've learned Spanish, then, you know, you could build on that with Portuguese or French or so on. But my nephew, who's at Leeds University at the moment, didn't do languages at school or gave them up really early and then regretted it. He's actually studying politics, but he did a course online through something called the Goethe Institute. That's a German government initiative, and they do sort of subsidized courses online. And as a result of that, he's just spent 1 year living in his third year at university, living in Hamburg. And because there's a link between his university and Hamburg. And he's just had the most amazing time. He's a musician. He's into kind of techno music, and he's got into the whole techno music scene. And again, you know, that's through, he did languages, did German on the side. Then he's gone to live there. He's not fluent, but he can have, you know, he can get by, and he's enjoying life as a result. And he's had this whole other experience. And who knows? I mean, he's 21, but he might end up, you know, getting a job in Germany at some point. And that will just look really good on his CV, because employers will look at that and they'll go, oh, that's interesting. You know, imagine you're an employer and you're getting loads and loads of CVs and they all look pretty much the same. And then you have somebody who goes, oh, well, this person went and lived in Germany for a year and did, that's interesting. Makes you a little bit different, gives you something to talk about in the interview, makes your future employer think that you're probably somebody who, you know, thinks a bit about out of the box, who's perceptive, all those skills I mentioned earlier. So it makes you more attractive to future employers, no question about it.
Yes, certainly. We're heading towards the end of our time. We have about 5 minutes left or so you have time for just one or two more questions before we look at closing the session down. And we've had a question come in from Micah and Yasmin, and they've asked, was it hard with your dyslexia? I think during school and, you know, education, university, while obviously learning languages as well, but was it hard with your dyslexia?
Yes, it was. I think because very often, you know, so for instance, when I was younger, you know, I'd have to be taken out of lessons and off to some porter cabin. So you're immediately kind of singled out as being, you know, and I felt at certain stages that, you know, maybe I was a bit stupid and, you know, why wasn't I getting as good a grades? And I wasn't diagnosed until really practically at the end of school. So I think they just thought I was being lazy or So it was difficult. I mean, I was lucky because my parents were always very encouraging and basically sort of told me to ignore that and ignore people who told me that I couldn't do things. So when I wanted to become a journalist, I went to the careers advisor at university, and they were saying, well, it's really, really difficult to become a journalist. Also, you know, the dyslexia is a bit of an issue. Now, by that time I'd been diagnosed and I had a special note so that examiners didn't mark me down too much. But I now see my dyslexia, can I just say, as a bit of a superpower. I have learned that dyslexics see the world in a different way. We don't do detail very well, but we do big picture really well. I'm actually quite good at analysing things. I've realised this as a journalist. My brain had, you know, being neurodiverse can give you advantages over other people. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do something. If you want to do it, have a go. Don't be put off. And that goes for languages. And can I just say, I think learning foreign languages made me more confident because it enabled me to communicate with lots of other people. It enabled me to make friends in all sorts of different parts of the world. And with that confidence, that helped me in my career as a journalist.
Awesome. We're going to go for one more question before we wrap up today's session. And this is a nice sort of summary question that's come in, and it's come in from Ella and Brooke. And they have asked, why do you enjoy it? Why do you enjoy learning those languages? What is it you love about that?
I think I enjoy it because I'm quite a sociable person, and I enjoy communicating and connecting with people, but I'm also a very curious person. I want to understand how other countries work, how other cultures are, and so it satisfies my curiosity. Also, there's a big sense of achievement. It makes me really proud when I can go to another country and speak another language, or, you know, that my husband is a really amazing linguist. He speaks about 7 languages, and, you know, every time we might, I don't know, he'll sort of meet somebody who's Czech. Now, very few English people speak Czech, so if he meets some Czech people and he bursts into fluent Czech, they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. So it's kind of fun. It's like it's a fun trick that you have, you know. I'm sure lots of you who speak another language at home, very often, like, you have a secret language that other people don't have. That's great, you know. And like my stepson's mother is Serbian, so he speaks Serbo-Croat, and he and his sister would often use Serbo-Croat when they were at school in London as their sort of, you know, secret language. So it gives you, you know, I like having that edge. Yeah, that's what I think is fun about it.
And before we end today's session, then, do you have any final thoughts or feelings that you'd like to leave our young people with today?
I want you all to give it a go and make it enjoyable for yourself. So yeah, don't be put off. Don't feel embarrassed. But do give it a go. Too many English, you know, too many people in the UK don't speak foreign languages, and it makes us more insular. And by that I mean inward looking. And I think it's really important to look out and embrace other cultures, and learning a language is a way of doing that. It doesn't have to be your career. It doesn't have to be your university degree. Just give it a go.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming on today and, you know, giving an hour of your morning to us to talk about languages. It's so important, and we've had so much interest for this broadcast. It's such an interesting subject to think about, learning another language and learning about another culture. And you've talked about so many interesting things and about all the opportunities. I've loved hearing about all your different family members and how the different languages they've learned have taken them all over the world for different kind of career opportunities and into industries that they wanted to get into. Crazy and so wonderful to hear. So thank you for sharing everything with us today. It's been so great.
I'll try goodbye in a few languages then. Sayonara, see ya, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir. Okay.
Love it. Thank you so much. It's been so great.